may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Ow! What big eyes you have, the kind of eyes that drive most mad. So just to see that you don't get chased, I think I ought to walk with you for a ways. What full lips you have, they sure look someone bad. So until you get to Grandma's place, I think you ought to walk with me and be safe.
Yeah, welcome to Commentaries of the Night. Oh, see, it's like, again, it's like, I not only do I sound like Adam Sandler in Hotel Transylvania, I feel like that. And nobody in this day and age wants to feel like Adam Sandler. And like, Hotel Transylvania is like maybe one of his better franchises these days. But even still, I don't want to feel like Adam Sandler in any situation. But I maybe, depending on the situation, might want to feel like Dylan McCandless, Super DM 64, joining me tonight.
Oh, was that?
That was it. That was it, man. I'm not doing that shit again. There we go. We're in. Commentaries of the Night. Welcome to day one.
Shit. Live. We're fucking live. We should make this a silent commentary. Just write out a script.
Oh, sure. That's great. So you know what? We're not going to talk anymore. Just
we're just gonna write out a script, and you'll get your commentary in the form of title cards.
Oh God. Yeah, great. Then
It'll
I'll
be
have to edit the whole thing.
It'll be impossible to watch alongside the actual movie, which is perfect.
Oh, great. So you'll have to read two separate sets of text at once. See, the beauty of this is like we can talk our bullshit, and for once, like just reading the subtitles is all the original filmmakers ever intended. So perfect.
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing about this, if you wanted to, and you won't, because I know you, but if you wanted to, because this movie is public domain, you could actually have the movie under the commentary.
I guess I could. We'll see. But what if Brayton makes like a sexy title card? Then no, they've all got to be consistent. No. People can watch them on their own.
The sexy title card would be up during our this bullshit. What we're doing right now. If anybody at home hasn't figured it out yet, we're doing a silent movie.
You're pressuring me into this. I don't like this. You're making.
No, it is not. And it is not the Mel Brooks classic silent movie. It is something quite different. I guess we should probably. We haven't even really.
No, you were so surprised by the fact that I started that you just had to take a minute and kind of settle yourself in. So
you got me all thrown off here.
Good. That's the way I like it. Because guess what, Dylan? It's almost Halloween. Well, when we start posting these, right now it is not almost Halloween when we're recording this, but theoretically,
the Halloween season has began for me. There's no holidays in between now and then. If Christmas can start in fucking November,
then Halloween can start in late August. Great.
Exactly.
All right, so I guess that's the line you're gonna draw. So I guess I can't stop you. So I'm glad that I threw you off and startled you so much by just tossing you into this. So the idea here, kids, is to do another almost week-long commentary series, a little longer, as we always do, of a, sort of thematic series of films, whether they be in one franchise or featuring one character, or in this case being under one studio head that sort of put them all in the same universe, kind of. Then that's what we're here to do for you. So Dylan, what said franchise or theme, what the hell are we talking about?
We are talking about the very first cinematic universe. Suck on that, Marvel. The Universal
and
horror
Godzilla
film.
Too.
Yeah, and fuck you, Godzilla. I love you. We're talking about Universal horror. And obviously, most people think of that And I mean, the official horror cycle starts with Dracula in 1931. But if you talk to most, film historical people who give a shit about this, they will trace it back even further to the 1925 silent film Phantom of the Opera, starring the Lon Chaney, the not junior one. And so that's what we're going to be watching tonight. And this is going to be the first time that we've recorded a commentary for a silent film. So we'll see how that goes.
Mm-hmm. This is not the first time we've watched a silent movie together. We have watched Nosferatu together before, which we could have also done for this, although that's not a Universal horror movie. Maybe we'll do that at some other time, but...
We could do a whole other thing if we wanted to go into German expressionism.
Oh yeah, we could do that. That would be a totally different thing from anything we've ever done. We'd be in wholly different territory. But
what we do when we run out of ideas.
we try new things. What a preposterous thought. So yeah, we're talking about the Universal monster movies. So we're going to start with Phantom of the Opera, which is not one that it was not one that I ever really considered part of the group. Basically until you told me that we should probably include it in this, and it makes sense. It's produced by Universal. Carl Laemmle is the big name on this as the producer, and his son was the one who pushed forward a lot of these horror movies in this day and age, and produced Dracula and a lot of the big sound horror movies that we'll get into in the coming days that are more iconically part of the Universal classic monsters mythology, the famous Monsters of Filmland covers of old.
Well, it's also important to note, and I think you'll notice this when we were watching this, Bill, because, fun fact, this is actually going to be the first time Bill's ever seen this movie in full. Almost like one of our X-Men videos, except I'm there for you actually seeing it.
And there for me to go like, what's going on?
I think you'll notice, and I think the reason a lot of people trace the beginnings to this film is that a lot of the sort of atmosphere and stuff that becomes so great later on is sort of established here. This is the beginnings of them starting to borrow from that films like Nosferatu and shit from Germany, and start to develop this really unique sort of gothic look that became the staple of the Universal film, the Universal horror film in the 30s.
Indeed.
So that's what this is very important for. It's also very important for a wonderful performance by Lon Chaney, who is just one of the best people from early Hollywood. I mean, probably the greatest silent film star ever. I mean, most people would probably give that to like a Chaplin or so, but Lon Chaney, known as the man of 1,000 faces, he pioneered so much in the way of like character acting. And his ability to totally physically transform himself. This was a man who played people who had lost their arms and legs and shit. And makeup at this time was very crude, so often what he was having to do to pull this off was extremely painful, and he would act right through it. He was a fantastic performer, and it's really easy to see where his son got it all from. Mm-hmm. But getting a little ahead of myself now.
Sticking vodka in his mummy legs and drinking it through a straw.
Indeed.
So I've always been aware of the importance of Lon Chaney Sr.'s role in all this, and the original Phantom of the Opera being his most iconic performance, I think, probably right next to The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and
yes,
I guess also the London After Midnight vampire, even though A, that's not actually a vampire, and B, that movie is lost. So.
Yes, I wish I could find a print of that somewhere.
Mm-hmm. But very bizarre that like he's not actually a vampire in that, but it's remembered as like this lost horror classic. Like it's so weird. But this, on the other hand, was not lost, or was it lost for a time and then we found it, or I don't remember. This is not a movie I have a lot of familiarity with. This is not because this is not a character or a story that I have ever given any semblance of a fuck about.
Yeah, well, I think one reason is most people these days would immediately think of the musical.
Right, which is my perception of the Gerard Butler version or the Broadway version. The one where he was like a discotheque nightmare. Remember that? Phantom of the Paradise or whatever?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that one. I've never actually seen that one in full. But Yeah, most people go to the musical when you mention this story. A lot of people don't even know that it's based on a book originally. I mean, I've introduced this fact to many people who are like, "Oh, the musical," and I'm like, "No, not the musical, the good one."
So, I mean, I guess it's kind of like the natural place to think because it says Phantom of the Opera, and when you think opera, you think music. But just because a movie has music in it does not make it a musical.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the distinction here. So that's why I'll probably like this more than any bit of any other Phantom of the Opera thing I've seen. But, yeah. So otherwise...
Now, there are different versions. Now, this is actually a public domain movie, so it'll be the easiest thing for you listening at home to find. Open up another YouTube window, and voila. But there are also, like, several different versions out there. So I guess Bill put the link in the description, maybe. Yeah, maybe you remember to do that there.
Also pressuring me into doing things. But yes, I think I'll have to do this, at least this time, because I want you guys to be watching the exact same version. And since this is a public domain movie... And since the person who uploaded this won't get in trouble for me pointing out attention to them, I'll do that. Usually I don't do stuff, like I didn't do that for another movie we did a commentary on recently that we watched on YouTube because I didn't want that person to get in trouble for, us being like, hey, we found it on YouTube. But this, obviously, that won't be a problem because it's public domain. So,
right.
Yeah. Otherwise, the only other things I want to say is I'm just really excited to be doing the Universal Monster movies, and the fact that we're starting with one I haven't seen is very cool. Again, it has this element of mystery and mystique. It's Halloween. It's perfect, man. We couldn't have brewed a better pot, a better cauldron to keep it thematically appropriate. You see what I'm saying?
Indeed.
But yeah. So I guess the only thing that remains to be said is, what is your perception of this film before, like what do you think of it before we watch it this time?
I really like this. This was the first silent film that I ever found myself like super immersed into. And for a while I didn't even try to watch silent film, and then I saw this. Because of my love of Universal horror, and that's what opened the door for me into seeing things like Metropolis or Chaplin's Modern Times, shit like that. This was the first silent movie to really open that door for me. I mean, it's a fucking classic, man, and a marvelous performance, as I said before, from Lon Chaney. Even though you don't actually get to see it for very long, runtime wise. It leaves an impact.
Is this going to be like a Godzilla 2014 situation?
Well, throughout most of the movie, because he's the fucking Phantom of the Opera, he's wearing a mask, and it's only at a certain point that he gets unmasked, and then you see what he actually looks like, and go, oh, that makeup, it's...
I feel like Godzilla 2014 would have been better if they would have done that. No, I'm kidding.
Godzilla mask.
He's just very sensitive about his looks. He's a very poor self-image.
They should have done that with Shin.
I think they did. I think that was part of the point of the silent scream that was on his face the whole movie. Anyway, so why don't we, if you kids have gone to the link that I purportedly put in the description of this video and have got the movie at 00, you should see like a foggy version of the opening titles screen on there if you're at 00, or maybe a black screen. I don't know how YouTube links open.
This is not the version on YouTube that is in the best quality, but it is the longest runtime that I found, which suggests to me that it's the most complete. So that's why we're going with this one.
So we couldn't ask for better circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be kicking off Commentaries of the Night in 3, 2, 1, play. So I guess we should start with the title, Commentaries of the Night. It was a long, tumultuous process to come up with a title for this show. Because
it was a matter of us being like, that's a nice title, but can we come up with a better one? And we couldn't.
Well, because this was the only one we came up with that I didn't have like like if I was ever gonna do a series about whatever franchise we've done, like we did Planet of the Apes, we did Kong, I always had an idea of what I'd call that. Although we ended up not going with the original plan of like using Palooza for Planet of the Apes, but we came up with something better, like very naturally. But the Week of Kong, I always had that on the like in the back of my mind as a title. But I never had it like I never planned to do a series on Universal Monsters. This is also kind of a, again, it's a fresh direction for us. So Commentaries of the Night may not be our most, like pithy, like, most clever title, but it's got a certain it's got that referential nature to it that we need in order for it to work. Because I couldn't come up with any sort of variation on like Universal Monsters or Famous Monsters of Filmland or whatever. So that was all I had, and Dylan couldn't come up with anything better. So that's the way it is.
Well, I think it matches the tone of the movies we're watching, so that's fine.
Very dark, like right now in this movie. So Phantom of the Opera. So far, this movie makes me feel very depressed.
Probably part of the idea.
Right. So that's one question. This is a horror movie. That is the intent, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's obviously one major change from every other version of this I've ever seen, where that is not the intent. And that's like maybe like a background sort of aesthetic thing.
Even the 40s version of this movie with Claude Rains that we considered doing in this series, but ultimately didn't, just because we wanted to keep the list shorter. Maybe we can do it, because eventually we'll have to do addendums to this series to cover all the sequels.
Oh my god, we have to do, this is the series that we'll have to do the most addendums to.
Exactly. So maybe we can do the Claude Rains version of Phantom at some point as well. Even it's even less of a horror movie. I mean, it's a horror movie in that there's a madman doing like murderous things, but it's not really. It doesn't have that sort of atmosphere, The interesting thing about early horror films, early American horror films, is that they all seem to center around the idea of dismemberment, and many people have
What do you mean?
Well, like, look at Lon Chaney's career. In this movie, he plays a man who was born with a terribly disfigured face, and so became this phantom and stalked this Paris opera house and what have you. Hunchback of Notre Dame, he plays a hunchback. There's the famous Todd Browning movie Freaks, which is awesome. And
So you're saying people are obsessed with people who are fucked up?
Yeah, most of Lon Chaney's role.
No, I was gonna say degenerates, but they're not degenerates. They're just because they have like a physical ailment, but it's that physical ailment that makes people think they're degenerates. That very stigma that I fell into is what America in this time period was, being preyed upon with with these movies, the fear of the unknown, the fear of the bizarre, and what the bizarre can wrought.
Most of Lon Chaney's early horror film role, I mean, most of the movies he's known for is movies where he's, a guy who lost his arms or whatever. And many people have theorized that this is because of all the people who returned from World War I, missing limbs and things. And due to the advances in medical technology, more people survived that war than had ever survived any war before. And so we got to see a whole lot more of the disfigurement. And that seems to be where this idea entered the American consciousness. It's sort of like, you encounter somebody who's got some sort of physical disfigurement in their life. There's that sense of
inherent, like, uncomfortableness, and like, it's not fear. It's almost just like, it's an awkward sense of like, you're not sure how to react. Like oh my god, something's missing. Shake hands at somebody, but like, why do you only have 4 fingers? Like, oh shit.
Yeah, and then that's what the films of this period pretty much were preying upon. Now, interesting factoid, one of the ballerinas in this sequence is Carla Laemmle, the niece of Carl Laemmle, the guy who owned the studio, and she would go on to famously have the very first lines in Dracula.
Right. I want to go back to something we were talking about a second ago, though, the physical ailment thing. Do you think that the fact that they make that the center point of why we're picking these people to be the focal point of horror stories is because we're still in this silent era where it's all visual, so that instantly makes it easier for the audience to distinguish, okay, that's the center, that's the horrific character, that's the character who's supposed to be scary.
I suppose the visual aspect of it does play a role, although they could do the same thing with a traditional sort of gothic-looking monster. There really was a sort of interest, it seems, in the consciousness of the time with, normal humans who are horribly disfigured.
Well, I think that's just because they know that that's going to get people more personally and more viscerally than if it's like a big scary monster. I mean, there is that silent movie. I think it's called Night of the Demon or whatever, where there is that big scary bat demon thing, and I think that's 10 times scarier than the Phantom of the fucking Opera. So
it's not a Universal.
Anyway, you were saying something.
Is that film you were just describing a Universal film?
No. I'm pretty sure it's a foreign film, like a British film maybe.
Oh, yeah, see. One of the main reasons that Universal pretty much only did these kind of quote-unquote horror films is because Carl Laemmle was sort of against the idea of horror films.
Right,
it was only
that's the big thing.
It was only when he passed the studio on to his son. His son was all into that sort of thing.
He loved that shit. But he also, not only did he love it, but he also knew that everybody else loved it, and there wasn't anybody really profiting from it in film. Like, Dracula was a huge success on Broadway. And Frankenstein has always been a huge stage thing as well. Those stories capture people's imaginations regardless of time period. They still do. And he recognized that at that time. And even when nobody else did. And that's always the people who end up making money in these situations. And guess what? Carl Laemmle Jr. went on to make lots and lots of money. And his dad lots and lots of money despite himself.
Here the new owners, or maybe the former owners, are discussing the mystery of Box 5. So basically Box 5 is this one viewing box in the Opera House that's always been reserved, and nobody knows who it is that has this box reserved. And of course it's the Phantom. Yeah, he has that box. He always reserves that box so he can watch over the what's going on.
So are they going in there? Ah, yes, they are. Oh boy, there he is.
Lon Chaney. One of the reasons he's such an amazing silent performer, and probably couldn't translate into the talkies. I'm not sure how that went for him, but he was such a wonderful silent performer because he had a natural gift for pantomime. And are you aware why?
Wasn't his wife his parents were
both
deaf?
Of his parents? Yes, both of his parents were completely deaf.
Right.
Apparently his grandfather ran like a school for like deaf and mute people, and they actually met there. And so he naturally had to develop a great ability at pantomime in order to communicate everything physically.
That's so interesting. Because then, when you're growing up, and because he had full capability of speaking and hearing, right?
Yes.
So when you're growing up, and you're at home, and you're doing the pantomime, are you also speaking? Like, because when you see people do sign language, because I don't even know if we're even talking about sign language, but when you see people do sign language, a lot of the time they'll talk when they're doing the sign language. I guess the idea is that they're hoping like the person will start matching the words with the signs, and like, because I know that there are some deaf people who can read lips.
I don't even know if sign language as it exists in its current form was around at the time. I'm not sure when that.
Well, maybe that's the thing then. So maybe that would be. I mean, that's like 10 times harder then. So then talking is completely pointless.
I mean, maybe I'm talking out of my ass. Maybe they did have sign language at the time, but I wouldn't be surprised if not.
Yeah, because... you know what? I think about like Helen Keller's time. They had like when you see those movies, like they talk about like, oh, sign language is not going to work with her because whatever.
Yeah, I guess you're right. So they probably did. So yeah, you're probably right. They had sign language at the time.
Yeah.
But
it's not a matter
even
of
still...
but my point is, when you
He had to
go
learn-
out into sorry, go ahead.
Well, the point is he had to learn to use his body to communicate, and
Right.
then those are the skills that he transferred over into his performances.
I'm just wondering, when you go out into the world, then, how do you adjust then? Like we're saying, like, how does he adjust to talkies? It's like, how do you adjust to the world even? Like after growing up like that.
I would assume that his grandfather, who apparently ran a school for people who were deaf and mute, could talk and things. I'm pretty sure he probably started that school because he had a deaf son.
I'm not
he
saying
probably
like
had
he never met anybody when he was a kid who could talk or
Exactly.
wasn't deaf. I'm just saying that when you spend so much time like that, it's got to be the difference in communication and the difference in awareness has to be like very, very different, I would imagine. Or even just, I don't know, you would just feel a different sort of connection with people. Or maybe even a lack of it with some people because of the way they communicate. Maybe that's why he was so good in this movie. Because of that disconnect with a large majority of society.
Well,
Not that I'm saying he definitely had that, although everything I've ever heard about him makes it seem like maybe he did. But
that's certainly a theme in the characters that he portrayed.
I'm in The Hunchback of Notre Dame for sure. I don't know what the fuck that deal was with that vampire wannabe in that in London After Midnight, but I assume he too did not like people, or at least he was alienated from them.
I don't know if everybody listening to this is aware of this, but there's a fair chance that maybe somebody is listening to this because they're familiar with the later Universal monster movies and maybe don't know much about the silent era ones.
Yeah, maybe they're watching this. We're like, when are they going to talk about the Wolfman? And I'm like, in like 6 or 7 days, bro.
The movie The Man Who Laughs, which was actually the inspiration for the Joker in the Batman comics, which went on to be wonderfully performed by Conrad Veidt, who you might know from Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. That movie was originally intended for Lon Chaney, and he couldn't do it for reasons I don't remember. I think maybe he was. I don't want to even speculate about it because I'll probably be wrong. Point is, he couldn't do it for whatever reason, and that's when they got Veidt. So, and that's another character that's very much in the same vein. The poor, misunderstood, dismembered person.
Mm-hmm. So this guy was murdered? Is he dead?
Yes.
And they're blaming it on the Phantom. Did the Phantom actually kill him?
As far as I can remember, I think so, yeah.
So he's not so much misunderstood as a murderer.
Well, he's a murderer because of
prior misunderstandings. I see. But at this current point, he is very understood.
He's like Killer Croc in that way.
But most versions aren't like that, right? Most versions, he's more put together, but he's more like, he's on like a knife's edge. Like he might be tipping. Like he sort of like dances around being a murderer, and it's more ambiguous.
Well, from what I've never actually read the book, but from what I understand, this is probably much closer in regards to the Phantom's characterization.
Okay, interesting.
Obviously, the Lloyd Webber play is way out the fuck off.
Right. And so maybe that's my interpretation of that Lloyd Webber version dipping into the version where it's because this is probably more interesting where we're dealing
with a character who's been heavily romanticized and looking back at his original dark root here.
Right.
Even the Claude Rains, but that is a lot more romanticized than this. And that's also a weird situation because that movie takes great liberties with the plot. Not saying that this movie doesn't take any liberties with the plot.
See, because I had always heard that like the Claude Rains version was more based on the book than this one even.
No, because the Claude Rains version puts in this whole backstory that, as far as I'm aware, wasn't there before.
Okay.
And it also insinuates that he might be, instead of a love interest relationship because of the difference in age, they also kind of insinuate that the girl he's obsessed with might be his daughter, but they never have the balls to come out and say it. So they never have the balls to come out and say it.
It's very different.
So you walk out of the movie saying, Okay, so was she his daughter, or was he just obsessed with her?
See, I'm sort of lost now. I mean, we're talking, so that's part of it. That's part of it. But I feel like what's going on in the opera house around the Phantom sneaking around murdering people.
Yeah. Well, so what's happening is the Phantom is sending notes because he wants them to replace the current prima donna with Carlotta with the girl that he's interested in, whose name is escaping me. Mary Philbin's character. He's in love with her. You know, he wants to make her the star of the opera, and so he's trying to pressure them into replacing Carlotta, who is the current head singer, and that's why all the murders and all the shenanigans.
Ah, okay. This is a very classic monster situation where we have an establishment here with the opera house that's been around for a long time, and it's been around for so long that the current regime really doesn't even have any grasp on the history of it and what's really there. Like, there was that opening part in the beginning where they talked about how, like, oh, there's all these dungeons and torture chambers down there.
Yeah, well, you're dealing with medieval architecture, so there's all kinds of like secret passageways and the catacombs under the city, and so it's very easy for this person to hide. Something like this could never happen in a modern day Walmart.
Right.
But
Well, maybe it could. I mean, that's the thing. Like that. Like, it depends on the people running the place, and then it depends on the vastness of it. Like, think about like Relic, like the book we reviewed last year. Like, the Museum of Natural History is a big, gigantic place, and because of the way it's run by a certain amount of people and by a certain amount of people with a certain amount of expertise, like it something like that could happen and fester if the circumstances are right. And this is kind of a similar situation where it's like you have this guy who's like stalking around and taking advantage of this place and taking advantage of the complacency of it. And now he's
similar situation. I wouldn't be surprised if I found out that this story had any influence on Relic. Actually, now that I think about it, because there's that whole thing about
Whittlesey is sort of phantomy, isn't he?
Well, there's that whole thing about the underneath the museum, all the old. It's just like the catacombs under the Paris Opera House. It's a striking similarity, actually. Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
It's like a maze down there.
Right.
The difference is that's a monster, whereas the Phantom is a traditional sort of mustache twirling villain.
Right. Well, I mean, they're similar in the sense that they are men who have become alienated from people. Just one a lot more overtly than the other.
Yeah.
That's another interesting comparison. Huh. Very, very interesting.
It's really interesting that this story has endured the way it has, actually, because, again, and I've never read it, from what I understand...
Because everybody hates opera, you're saying.
Well, partially, yes, but also because, and again, I've never actually read the book myself, but from what I understand, it's not like a masterpiece. It's not like your Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or your Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's very pulpy.
Yeah, I mean, so are those to a certain extent.
But I guess the idea of this shadowy figure, looming over this famous fixture of Paris, I guess it was fascinating enough to the readers to make it endure the way it has. Just goes to show you don't have to write fucking Shakespeare to make it into the zeitgeist.
Well, is it more a better concept than it is like a really brilliant story? Like a really effective narrative? Like, it's more just like a good idea. Like, okay, so here's this scenario. There's this opera house, and there's a guy there, and he likes a girl, and he wants the girl to get what he thinks she deserves, so he starts killing people. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think it all depends on how you cast it and how you play it. And I think a horror movie vibe is definitely the way to go.
The biggest variation from the book to this movie, because for the most part it's pretty faithful. The biggest deviation is in the ending, because apparently in the book they do sort of a Darth Vader redemption thing with the Phantom at the end, where he decides to let the girl go of his own free will. We're being introduced to Raoul, her love interest, the man she actually loves. So the foil to the Phantom later on in the film. Anyway,
Our generic
In the
white
book-
guy.
In the book, he well, it is France. In the book, he has a redemption thing at the end and decides to let her go. And in this, they do the classic angry mob chasing him. The ending. A pre-Frankenstein angry mob in a Universal horror film.
Mm.
So here we have. God, I really hate that I'm blanking on her name since it's such a big part of the story. But Mary Philbin.
One thing that always strikes me about silent movies is that the cinematography is always a million times better than early sound movies. Like, the cinematography in Dracula is actually rather good, considering how experimental it is, and the Spanish version is actually better. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But even still, it's 10 times more limited than this is, and this is 10 times more evocative than those are.
Yeah, well, it's because, they really had to bank on that. And once sound came around, I really feel like, and I mean, a lot of it would also have to do with the limitations of the early sound technology.
Well,
I'm
that's
sure
right,
that
though, but the sound ended up limiting what you could do with the camera, which was interesting. And only as it did less so were we able to kind of get back to this kind of look.
But I also think, because after a while, you get into, there are some movies in the 50s where that sound equipment should not be hampering them to the degree that the camera work seems to be hampered. You know what I mean?
At that point, we're getting into budget and pacing then.
Yeah. Well, I also think there's
That's
an element of
post-TV as well, when movies are starting to be affected by that crowd.
I also think there's an element of laziness involved as well.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think there's more of a reliance on people sitting around talking and like, oh, we don't want to have the actors get up. The blocking is too good here, and we don't want to have the sound guy move. God forbid.
Look how, and this is one of the things I love about this movie, the way it slowly reveals him to you over the course of the film. They're not even showing us the mask yet. Everything we see of him in this scene is in shadow. And earlier we got the back of his head. Later on we get to see his mask. And it's not the mask that everyone thinks of when they think Phantom of the Opera. Again, that comes from the Lloyd Webber version. Later on, we get to see his mask, and then only, near the end of the film, in the famous scene where Mary Philbin unmasks him, do we actually get to see the face, the famous face.
She's getting another letter. I wonder if it's going to be a positive one. Hey, you really improved this time, Carletta, or whatever your name is. You should keep trying. So basically he's like, correct this shit or somebody else will die, right?
Okay, so Christine is the name of the main character who Mary Philbin plays.
Mm-hmm.
I was blanking on that before.
So this is not the girl singing. This is the girl singing's mother?
Yeah. She's the one who's making a big fuss over the Phantom trying to get her daughter kicked out of the top spot.
Oh, okay. See, I thought she was supposed to be like a big, ugly diva who was actually singing, but no, she's the mother. I don't even know if we've seen or heard from the girl who he hates so much.
We've seen her on stage because Christine hasn't been put on. Well, I mean, she's been on stage. She's obviously been on stage as a singer, but she hasn't been put in the prima donna spot yet. So
right.
Whenever you've seen that blonde chick on stage and they've been doing the opera thing, that's been Carlotta.
I love it when the PS is almost as long as the full letter.
I always like the beginning of the story is the people who owned the opera selling it to new people and being like, all right, suckers, good luck. By the way, totally haunted.
By an actual person, too. Like, I mean, he's not a ghost. He's a dude who is a murderer. So,
right. It's
very different. It's not like they can call the Ghostbusters and be like, oh, we're fine. It's like, no, you got to call the fucking police.
Well, that's part of the mystique, though, is that they don't.
They can't just call the Ghostbusters.
The reason it's called Phantom of the Opera is because nobody's really sure if it's a man or a ghost or something else.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad this is a silent movie, so we don't have to hear the opera.
Yeah, that's one of the painful things about the Claude Rains version.
Oh, I imagine so. Oh god, I definitely don't want to do that one in this first main series, because that is going to be hard to get through.
And they're not even opera numbers in that movie. They actually had like original music composed for that film that they performed in those scenes, because I guess they couldn't get their
So it's
rights
not
in it.
opera?
It's not actual opera, no.
What a fucking bunch of bullshit.
It's a 1940s American movie. I think anybody in the audience was sitting there going, oh, that's not Wagner or whatever. Like,
No, I'm not saying they would, but I'm saying that it makes the title a fucking lie. Not that that isn't against the American way, but
I mean, it already is kind of a lie because he's not actually a phantom, is he?
no, but that's all right. That's like that's like saying Godzilla can't be called the king of the monsters because he isn't an actual king. It's a metaphor. But Phantom of the Opera, like, it should be it should be actual opera. I guess what would make it okay is if it's like an actual opera house. Like, so even if actual opera is not being performed, if it's at an opera house, I guess it's still fine. Because it doesn't refer to the show, it refers to the location.
Right.
But him being called the Phantom is just like it's all about the mystery and mystique you were talking about before. It's the persona he gives off. It's this, like, you know, alienated, almost dead person because of what's happened to him. So it doesn't matter if he's alive or dead.
You really latched onto this joke I made about how he's not actually a phantom.
I got very mad. Yes, you pushed the right button. See, because this isn't a movie I know a lot of things about, so I feel like when I have something that I really have to say, I'm just like, I'm gonna fucking say this shit. No,
You know, the opera set in this film is still standing at Universal Studios.
Oh, that's wild. I mean, is it? But they have to maintain it, like, insanely, I imagine, and they do it just because it's this is where the original Phantom of the Opera was shot.
It's all covered in, like, fucking plastic and shit, and I think they've actually done some scenes for a few other movies there before. But it's all
like
covered
a
in
million
plastic.
years ago, or like recently.
I forget the name of the stage. But yeah, there's a specific number when you on Universal's lot. There's a specific stage where it's still up there and everything.
You know what else this movie is? It's Jaws. The opera managers are the mayor.
You'll never go into the opera.
We don't really have a Chief Brody, though. There is no voice of reason. There's no Quint. There's definitely no. I don't know if there's a Hooper. Is there a Hooper in this?
I guess Raoul is kind of a Hooper in that he goes after the Phantom later.
Wouldn't that make him more of a Brody or more of a Quint?
I guess he's kind of all of them in a way, isn't he?
He is in a way all of them. He's the male lead, right?
The Claude Rains version is probably a little bit more analogous in that way because in that movie there's like this whole love triangle thing going on where aside from the Phantom you actually have two other guys who are vying for her affections. And then
wow, this shot was a fucking mistake to put captions over. I'm
sure it looked great at the time, but you know, obviously the quality has degraded over the years. No idea what that said. Anyway, in the 1940 version, she actually has two love interests who spend the entire movie competing over her, and so at the end they have to sort of put their
10 times more interesting.
They have to put their differences aside in order to go down into the... You know, the best part about that movie is that Claude Rains, of course, is a fantastic actor. It just pales to this version in every other conceivable way. Okay, yeah, this was the chandelier sequence. So the guy who wrote the book...
Oh my god, this is very Relic.
The guy who wrote the book, Gaston Leroux, was inspired by a real-life incident that took place at the Paris Opera House in which not the entire chandelier, but like one of the things that hold it up fell from the roof and killed a person.
But it wasn't intentionally cut, right?
No, I mean, it was just a freak thing that happened. But that's what gave him the idea of the entire chandelier falling down into the crowd, which then led to the idea of some mysterious figure having cut the rope, and on and on from
That's
there.
very cool.
Okay, so there's this guy with the fez, and I'm trying to remember what his deal is. He's kind of a red herring throughout the
He just
film.
thinks fezzes are cool.
He's kind of a red herring throughout the film. He shows up whenever the Phantom's just done something, so that the audience goes, "Oh, it was that guy," and then later on they're like, "Oh no, it's not that guy."
Right, because we have no conceivable idea yet that he's like this disfigured monster of a man. All we know is that he's some asshole. And there was also that shot of him speaking in shadow earlier where he had like these really tiny hands, and he looks exactly like how Raoul looks right there. How Captain Fez dude. Well, there's the Phantom right there, though. So we obviously know it's not him because he's running up on the rafters when we just saw Raoul standing there.
If I'm remembering the plot correctly, because as much as I love this film, it's not one I rewatch often just because, silent films are hard to rewatch.
They are hard. They are hard to get into. Metropolis is the one that has always worked the best for me, and but Trip to the Moon, because that's real short.
Yeah. If I'm remembering correctly, though, the guy with the fez turns out to be like an inspector who's investigating.
That's
all
great.
This,
that's actually a really good reveal.
All the shenanigans. Yeah, and I've seen that trope used a million times in other things, and I wonder if they were inspired by this or if it's older than this. The idea of this person who you think is the villain who turns out to be like a cop. And the reason he's at all
Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla from '74. There's the Interpol agent who's pretending to be a reporter and is following them around the whole movie, and you think he's a bad guy, and then finally he's like, I'm with Interpol.
Yeah, you know what else is also clearly heavily inspired by this story?
Aside from Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, tell me.
Doesn't this feel like a Scooby-Doo plot to you?
Scooby-Doo...
I feel like every episode of Scooby-Doo is, especially the classic series Scooby-Doo, Where Are You, is a variation of this plot.
Yes, or Jaws, or any monster that is affecting a small town or any kind of local business, and the owner or the manager or the person responsible responds to it irresponsibly, or sometimes they're responsible for it. Something along those lines. Like that's the whole crux of Scooby-Doo. And that's the idea here.
The idea that you have a place that's haunted, and then come to find out it's just some dude using trickery.
Right, which is, I guess, the more general idea that Scooby-Doo lifted from this. So yes, I absolutely think so. What other examples of like, oh, they're monsters, but then they turn out to not be monsters, are there? Or in early Hollywood? Because there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
The big recent one, obviously, is The Village.
There's a comedy starring, what's his name? Shit. There's a comedy with Don Knotts called The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, 60s, I think.
I somehow knew you were going to bring that up. Oh my god, is that the Phantom?
Yeah, it's the mask. See, it only covers like half of his face, and it's got like these little tassels that hang down over his mouth. It's very different from what people now think of as the Phantom mask.
It is a little hard to see given the quality, but it's more in line with what I was expecting. Given your description.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in that movie it turned out to also be that the ghosts were just some like criminal. It's usually crooks. It's usually crooks that are like trying to scare people away from their hideout by making it seem like a place is haunted.
Right, or somebody trying to scare people off so they can inherit a fortune.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's another.
Or people seeking revenge, which is more of what this is.
Oh, it's not tassels. It's like a there's like cloth that hangs down from the mask that actually covers his actual mouth.
That's very strange looking. That's the one thing that I would have changed about the design. I get why he does that, because that way you can't see that part of the disfigurement, but I only know that because I've seen that bit of the movie before, so.
I like to think that he found this mask and then added the cloth to it to cover because he's got some gnarly teeth.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying. He's got to cover the right. He realistically should have like a Spider-Man mask on or something, you know? Everybody thinks Spider-Man is like horribly disfigured because of the costume he wears, so
yeah.
He should have like a full bodysuit. Deadpool style. I mean, Deadpool is the real example there.
There's something about his and again, Lon Chaney, a master of pantomime. There's something about his, the way he moves, his body language that I feel like Lugosi later picks up on for Dracula. I don't know if.
Well, remember, Lon Chaney was originally their go-to for Dracula, and I feel like Lugosi, in his attempt to capture some cinematic, scary poses, probably looked at this and took some inspiration. If he'd seen it, he remember he had just come fresh off the boat from somewhere in Europe, so maybe he had never seen this movie. He likely had.
That is possible. All I know is that, yes, as you mentioned, Lon Chaney was the go-to to play Dracula in 1931, and Lugosi actually went after that role like a madman, like a bat out of hell, because he had played the character on the stage, and he felt
and he
that
was like, I can speak English now, and they're like, we don't really believe you.
Look at me, I'm foreign and mysterious. And they were like, oh yeah, he is foreign and mysterious. Let's cast him.
Holy shit, he's right.
He is a foreigner.
I feel like that's how. I feel like that is the most realistic version of a Hollywood meeting we've ever done on one of these podcasts, where it's just like somebody will walk in and state something blatantly obvious, and then all of a sudden everybody acts like it's like this blinding like realization, and then all of a sudden that's the direction of the whole movie. Like, oh my god, he's not from this country. That's amazing.
My go-to example is always that scene from an early episode of Family Guy where Peter's talking to Congress about like cigarettes or whatever, and at some point he just goes, "Come on," and then everybody's like, "Hey, he's got a point." Yeah.
Everybody's always so easily fucking led. Sheeple. That's what you all are.
There's also the episode where Lois was running for mayor, and she wasn't getting the crowd on her side no matter what she said, and then finally she got them to cheer for her by saying, 9/11 was bad.
Oh, that's great. This is very From Russia with Love.
Yes, he's got this whole secret lair down here in the catacombs that you have to get to by this canal. And he's got like all kinds. He's got all kinds of like booby traps and shit down here that he uses later on to try and kill Raoul. Again, we're watching this because it's the most complete version that I could find on YouTube, but the quality is not wonderful. I would recommend anybody listening to this to go find a better quality version of it to see some of these great visuals.
Like watch it without us talking over it.
Yeah. This is probably not the ideal way to get into this film, honestly.
I'm following it fine so far. I mean, you're helping me. And the other thing is, too, I don't know if I would ever sit through this by myself. Because so far, this is by far the best version of this story I've ever seen, but it's still not lighting my world on fire. The fact that we're focusing so much on how dangerous and psychotic he is better, and I like how he comes off as more of like he really comes off as more of a scary monster.
The classic silent movie, hand raised up in the air while you're walking up the stairs.
I wish he was smarter, though. Because he doesn't strike me as very intelligent, and he strikes me as very impulsive.
That's interesting.
I wish he came off as like more of like a really not measured, but like very intelligent, cunning presence. Because then he would come off as more of a threat, I think. Like, I'm not saying he doesn't come off as a threat. I'm just saying That's really interesting that he comes off to you that way, because the idea behind the character of Eric in the book is that he's supposed to be, like, really good at everything. Like, he's a savant at, like, playing the piano, and he's like this master planner, and the only reason he's an outcast is because of his disfigurement. Like, if he had been born with a normal face, he would probably be on top of the world because he's literally good at everything. He's almost like Doctor Doom in a way, where it's like Doctor.
Yeah.
Well, he's almost like Doctor Doom in a way where it's like Doctor Doom can do anything. He is a man who is capable of anything. And in some versions, the only problem with him is he has one tiny scar on his cheek, and that's why he wears an entire suit of armor, because he has one tiny flaw, and that's just cataclysmic because he's perfect and he deserves perfection. You know,
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, would Einstein have changed the face of science if he had been born looking like the Elephant Man? Probably not. He probably would have been in a circus somewhere.
Right. I wish that was clearer, though.
And what might the Elephant Man had done if he had not been born looking like the Elephant Man? These are all...
Like, I also
questions.
wish he wasn't so overtly creepy with her. Because, again, I feel like that's less intelligent. Maybe it's just the position he's been put in.
Well,
But
I also think
I wish he was being craftier about going after her and trying to win her over.
I also feel like that is a function of silent movie acting. You know, everything has to be overt. And so if a character is creepy, he can't just be like, have some dialogue that makes you think, oh, there's something off about this guy. You know, he can't do what they did in Colossal. He has to be... He has to just be like, look at me, I'm creepy. And then the audience goes, oh, this guy's creepy. Like, that's how movies work, you know?
Right. I just feel like that doesn't translate at all now. Because there's no sense of character. Well, I mean, there's a sense of character. That's not true. But it feels like there's no sense of like... I'm not sure.
Humanity?
Maybe. Maybe not even humanity. Maybe it's just a simple sense of people don't feel like real people. But I guess that this is where we get that divide between, like, we're still watching stage performers in front of cameras at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what I'm searching for here is subtlety, and that's not what this is about.
No. And you got to think this is a 92-year-old movie.
Right. I think I'm looking for, like, somebody to look at this movie and go, oh, I'm going to make the really subtle version of that. And then that's the Phantom of the Opera movie I would like.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I don't like this. I'm just saying that it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah, the problem with all the versions after this is that they feel the need to romanticize it.
And that's the problem, because he is a very interesting character. Like that line right there where he just said, if I am the Phantom, it is only because humanity's hatred has made me so. Like, that's great. It's kind of like Kong Skull Island, where it's like there's the only enemy is when you go looking for one.
Mm-hmm. That's another element of this movie that gets carried over into later Universal monster movies, because there are really two types of Universal monsters. There are the evil ones, like a Dracula or a Mummy, and then there's your sympathetic monsters, your Frankenstein, your Wolfman.
And I feel like the Mummy is more of a gray area than Dracula.
Even your Invisible Man, who goes fucking nuts, but it's only because of this serum.
But he gets redeemed sort of at the end, right?
Yeah.
He's like, my dear, whatever the hell my love interest's name was, I can't remember. Flora was her name. He screams it a lot in that movie. I should have remembered.
I really wish the 40s version of Phantom of the Opera was better, because Claude Rains was the perfect choice to take over that role. Because
they really should have gone full flight with the whole idea of the girl supposed to be being his daughter, or maybe even like maybe she's not his daughter, but he thinks she is, or she represents the memory of his daughter to him.
Yeah, he's the perfect guy to take over that role, because if you look at what he's doing in The Invisible Man and that sort of mad genius, megalomania, you know, Lex Luthor in bandages thing, that's pretty much what this part would have called for. But the version of the Phantom that he wound up playing was very different from this and from the book. So, because again, that movie is an origin story, and you know, in this, you know, Eric was born disfigured. In that, he becomes disfigured.
That is very different and less interesting. That's like Two-Face then. Which...
Yeah, well, it's different. It's interesting in a different way. This is Killer Croc. That's Two-Face. Like that's.
Well, we're breaking it down with completely different Batman villains, but which one is more inherently Phantom of the Opera? I think Killer Croc.
Under the original characterization, yeah, definitely Killer Croc. I'm not sure what the case is in the Lloyd Webber version, but based on the fact that only part of his face is disfigured and the rest of him looks like Gerard Butler, I would assume that it was like the Claude Rains version.
I'm sure he was a pretty aristocratic child, and like there was some horrible carriage accident with a love interest, and she died, and half of his face got scratched or something, and then he was like, "Oh no, I'm too ugly." That's what I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but that's what I'm confident it was.
We're actually coming up on the unmasking scene now. I always forget the exact sequence of events in this film. I always forget that the unmasking is as close to the middle as it is. Yes, she's about to sneak up behind him here in a minute, and we're going to get the unmasking scene. Hopefully the quality evens out before then.
I was expecting it to be towards the end, huh?
I'm pretty sure that's the reason she goes back up to the surface, is because she unmasks him and she sees his ugliness, and then he's like, go get out of here. And then later on in the movie, he kidnaps her again because he kind of goes off the rails. It's one of the most famous scenes, probably of this entire era. Reportedly, people in 1925 ran screaming from the theater.
This is like the one scene that actually makes this a monster movie.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily, but because again, like the idea of the characterization that he gives, like the impression he gives off to everybody, is very monstrous. But the idea of like a physical monster being on screen, this is like the one bit.
Well, and it's a great reveal. I don't know if I'm not entirely sure about the timeline if anybody had done it before this, but I really think of this as like establishing like the great horror reveal,
Right.
I think again.
This is like when they pulled the mask off the Predator.
Yeah. Well, think about Jaws when Hooper goes under the water, and the score gives you the sense that something's about to happen, and then
the shark comes out of the gloom. Yeah.
No, I was actually talking about the scene where he finds the head, but yeah. Either of those moments, really, because it's
that's
reveal.
Because when you see the shark underwater for the first time, it's a big deal. I'm so good at playing the piano.
See, if he was around today, he'd be a big hit. He'd go to America's Got Talent.
He would get so much pussy. Oh my god, it's wild. Like his disfigurement will get him more pussy. That's the thing.
He would be Eric, the masked pianist.
Because he would go on like Reddit and he'd be like, "Ask me anything," and then people would ask him a bunch of questions, and he would become like a fucking celebrity, and then he would get so much pussy based on that.
I mean,
he would have so many Christines. He'd be going through them like toilet paper.
So many YouTube subscribers, so much just everything. I mean, look what television did for Susan Boyle. He don't look that bad. I mean,
he's still got the mask on.
Yeah, she's about to unmask him here in a moment.
Ah.
I feel like he read Beauty and the Beast as a kid, and he fantasizes that might happen.
Do you think that that's very interesting? Do you think that that's the idea? Like, he thinks that she's gonna have like some kind of Stockholm syndrome effect with him?
I think that's definitely what he's going for.
That's very interesting that he like tries to force that. That's a good that's like a good take with that kind of story that hasn't always been done, because oftentimes that happens, or the character who tries to make that happen is redeemed or something, but this is not one of those stories.
Or at the very least, I think he's just trying to get her to fall in love with his personality before he shows her his face, and she throws that out of the window. Oh, here we go.
He clearly thinks that she's the only person in the world who deserves to get a glimpse of him.
I've always loved how mischievous she comes off in this scene.
Well, because, yeah, this is a total dick. If he wasn't a kidnapping, like fucking perv, then he wouldn't deserve this. This would be horrible on her part, but that is a great shot.
Again, I would recommend people go watch a better quality version. The makeup in this, one of Lon Chaney's best, I think. Also extremely painful. He had to devise ways to hike his nose up to get that skull-like look and to pull his mouth apart into that wide, ghastly grin.
You know what I think is cool about it? You've never seen anything like it before. Or since. Every time we've ever done disfigurement or somebody burned, it doesn't look like this.
Yeah, nobody has ever gone this direction with the Phantom's disfigurement. Again, it's always just like burns on his face in every other version I've ever seen. And from what I understand, in the book, it's like this. It's a death's head thing. His head looks like a fucking skull.
You know what I think is cool about it? It's probably the most subtle thing about the movie. Because it's not, it doesn't have like this like incredible over the top, like he doesn't have like giant burns or anything. Like again, there's no disfigured injury. It's just sort of like he's misshapen.
He looks like he's ready to kill He-Man.
Yeah, he does. He does look very Skeletor.
I like that moment where he flies into like a delirium and starts laughing in her face. He starts to revel in her fear because he's just so used to it at this point.
Right. Well, because she pulled the mask off because she wanted to see it. So he's like, "Are you happy now?"
I wonder if Gaston Leroux, writing this book in the late 1800s, couldn't have imagined that he was writing an emo character, because I don't feel like that trope existed yet. But he's totally an emo. Like, he hangs out underground, he sleeps in a coffin, because the world has been so cruel to him. And he hangs down there pining and writing poetry about a fucking chick that lives upstairs and playing his piano. He's the archetypical emo kid.
Yeah, definitely. He's the archetypical, like, girl doesn't like me, so I'm gonna, like, fucking take it out on the whole world.
He's Electro Dave, basically. And,
Electro Dave the movie. Oh, God. This dude has some issues. In the sense that every man in the world has been in this position, but none of them have had a skull face or been a Phantom of the Opera, except this dude.
Right. And had a secret underground lair beneath the...
Like, if I had a secret underground lair and a skull face, like, God, the shit I would have pulled. But I don't have that. You know what I do when I get sad about a girl, like, being like, oh, I don't really like you like that? I smoke weed and I listen to music. That's what I do. I don't fucking threaten to murder people.
And on top of it all, he's balding.
What is this guy's life even about? Do you think that that's really the reason he wears the mask and the hat? It's like it's more about the fact that he's bald than it is about the face?
I mean, that's definitely what the hat's about.
Certainly.
Because other versions of the Phantom
He doesn't
who aren't
have
balding.
the hat.
Exactly.
So he is sensitive about it. That's very interesting. That, like,
And it's one of those,
even though he's got, like, this horrible face,
it's one
like,
of
he's
those
still sensitive about not having hair.
And it's one of those little, like, William Hartnell hats, too. You know what I mean?
It is a little William Hartnell-y. But
It's not a
that's
fez.
almost more of a... That's more of a fez, though.
Because it's not really a fez, but it doesn't have, like, a brim or anything to speak of. I don't know what you would call it.
It's almost like a Holden Caulfield hat, almost.
It's just a cap. I feel like the word cap is even more accurate than hat.
And all of a sudden, we are in a different movie.
Yes, so this is the one sequence of the film that is done in partial color, one of the sort of early color techniques. This is a thing that they did sometimes in silent films as kind of a gimmick. Now the color in this is super washed out because of the quality of the one we're watching. But if you watch some of the better versions, it is actually a pretty spectacular looking scene. And we're about to be introduced to a famous moment in which Lon Chaney enters the ball dressed as the Red Death from the Edgar Allan Poe story Mask of the Red Death, which Gaston Leroux referenced in his book.
Is that in the opera that he's entering?
What, this right here?
That character?
The Red Death?
Yes.
No, have you ever read The Mask of the Red Death?
No.
No, it doesn't take place in an opera.
I didn't.
That story is about this, like, there's this plague that's going around wiping out everybody in this kingdom, and the prince and all of the rich people have basically locked themselves in this fortress to party away while there's an apocalypse going on outside. And then the Red Death, which is the sort of anthropomorphized representation of the plague and also just death in general, shows up at the party, and everybody winds up dying.
That's unfortunate. But I get the reference with this.
Total boner kill, basically.
Which is what the Phantom wants to give off as the perception here. Like, oh, you're all having a good time, huh? Well, I'm not having a good time. This girl doesn't like me, so fuck you.
He embraces the chance to dress up and go to what essentially is the Paris Opera 1800s equivalent of, like, going to, like, a sick Halloween party.
Right.
He's totally an emo kid. That's all I'm saying.
He's like the master in that Doctor Who American movie. I always dress for the occasion. The Eric Roberts master.
Now he looks even more ready to kill He-Man. I think the choice of the skull
I must
mask
find Castle Grayskull, meh.
I've always thought that the choice of a skull for a mask is supposed to let Christine know who he is without anybody else knowing who he is.
Right, it's like a subtle... Again, it's one of the other subtle things in this. He just took that jester out.
It's an incredibly dramatic story. Like, it's way more dramatic than even a Dracula or a Frankenstein winds up playing itself because of the setting, because of the opera,
Because
and
there's
the
nothing
elaborate...
supernatural in it. It's all about the human drama. There is no, like, there is no monstrous, supernatural, abnormal presence to really threaten us. It's just the conflict between the characters.
Oh, I love the way he just slowly closed his fist right there.
That is a kick-ass outfit. That's a scarier outfit than his normal getup. Obviously, it's more ostentatious, but you know.
Yes, much more.
I'm scared by boldness. Confidence scares me.
He has a flair for the dramatic. And of course, Christine is breaking the rule that he gave her in being with Raoul.
This is pre, like, video monitoring, though, so she's safe. If you remade this in the present day, he'd have, like, a fucking camera on her at all times or something.
Have the whole fucking place bugged.
Yeah, that would be kind of interesting. You would want to do it in such a way, though, where it's, like, you don't just, like, bear it down in the aesthetics of the original. You want to really, like, you want to take the concept, like, what if this actually happened now?
He would have hidden a PA system in her room for those scenes when he's talking to her instead of just being behind a mirror, you know?
Right.
And,
I mean, he might even just, like, text her or something. Like just send her messages, or he could do any number of things.
In his lair underneath the opera house, he would, I imagine, just a fucking just wall of just screens with just, like, cameras that he's
like
hidden.
the Shredder in the 90s TMNT?
Yeah, or like in The Dark Knight, you know?
Yeah, or like exactly, like whatever the hell that piece of tech was called.
The big bat spying machine.
Nobody should have this kind of power, Mr. Wayne. I know. That's why it's gonna blow up as soon as you walk 5 feet away from it. Well, that sounds unnecessarily dangerous. Well, that's what I do. I'm Batman.
My criticism of you having too much power might sound hypocritical, considering the fact that I have played God on more than one occasion. I'm Morgan Freeman.
And that we keep tanks in the basement. Did you know, Mr. Wayne, that it is actually illegal for a company to keep tanks in the basement? Oh, he took his mask off there. That was cool.
Are you aware, Mr. Wayne, that if a terrorist were to go down into the sewers, he could place bombs and actually just get into our vault where we keep all of the tanks? like right under there is the sewers.
So you're saying that I have to beat somebody up?
Oh,
Well, probably.
You will fail, though.
Miserably. Yeah, why doesn't he just, like, take her away from the opera house? Like, realistically, that's how you solve this problem. Like, he's not going to follow her, because he's not going to leave the opera house, right?
It's true. In a way, Bane in The Dark Knight Rises is kind of Phantom-esque.
He is a little Phantom-y.
A disfigured man pining after a woman.
Yep.
Only in that version, the woman happens to be even more fucking crazy than he is.
Yep. Well, as far as we know. We don't really even know what his actual deal is in The Dark Knight Rises, because by the time we figure out what's actually going on, he's dead.
He wants to fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny.
Yeah, but he didn't like Ra's al Ghul.
How much you want to bet that after forking over all that money to get that one scene in color, that they use those shots for the posters and shit? Like, I'm willing to bet.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's your money shot, so to speak.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been the unmasking scene, because that was meant to be a secret.
She has betrayed me with the guy she was already with.
How dare she?
Like I said, man, we've all been here, but we're not all in dumb outfits on opera rafters.
I shall drop down and have a sword fight with him. No, I shall not, because I am not Gerard Butler, and this is a much better movie that wasn't directed by Joel Schumacher.
Oh my god, is that what happens in that? See, that's more how I would react. If I had a sword, that's how I would react whenever a girl was like, oh, I like this guy more than you.
Yeah, in the Joel Schumacher movie, Gerard Butler has a sword fight with Raoul on the roof, and Raoul has the opportunity to kill him and doesn't for some stupid fucking reason. And it's not even in the Andrew Lloyd Webber play. They added that for the movie, and I'm like, why?
That is ridiculous.
That you could have an action scene because it's 2000 whatever?
That's not even really an action scene. That's like saying the fencing bit in The Parent Trap is an action scene. It's not. It's a fencing scene.
You got to have stuff going on around the sword fighting for it to be
Die Another Day, the sword fight between Graves and Bond, that's not an action scene. It's a fight.
No. Now in the opposite of that, look at the fencing scenes in the Pirates of the Caribbean that always have like a million other things going on.
Yeah, those are action sequences, but it's defined by the background action.
That's one thing that I always appreciated about those movies. They had some good swashbuckling.
Yep.
I like the way the wind.
That was a bad jump cut, but there's a lot of that in silent movies. Have you ever noticed that? There's like a lot of bad jump cuts.
Yeah. Editing is in its infancy. But I like the way when he was up there, the wind picks up his cape. Makes him look even more ghostly. Movie, why are you still red herringing this guy? He's clearly not the Phantom of the Opera.
We already saw his face. He already told us his name. He's a psychotic murderer named Eric.
I mean, at this point, the inspector guy is actually helping them, so I guess it's not really a red herring moment. But the way they're still shooting him like he's this creepy fucking guy, and I'm like, no, you've already blown your wad on that. Like, I feel like this movie has better pacing than a lot of silent films, though, because I can't believe we're already a little over an hour in. Like, holy shit.
It's better than Metropolis, I would even say.
In terms of pacing?
Yeah. Yeah, as a movie, I would say I like Metropolis more. But again, that scratches more itches for me that I like. But,
I think it's because
pacing-wise, I think this is probably better.
I think it's because they knew how to establish the mystery and then unravel it over the course of the film.
It's a
give you
clearer
just
narrative structure, though, as well. Metropolis is more experimental.
they give you just enough at a time to keep you intrigued, and they sort of string you along that way. And in that way, they keep the pacing, good.
Born during the Boulevard Massacre.
One problem with Nosferatu, not taking anything away from Nosferatu,
I will.
But,
I don't really like that movie.
but all the scenes with the vampire are great. But man, getting to those scenes with the vampire.
Yeah, the rest of it's absolutely worthless. It's just a bad version of Dracula. Total darkness. Like we said, the quality on this version is definitely not the best.
No.
But at this point, they are aware the Phantom is a thing. Correct?
Yeah.
So, I think they're... Are they accounting for it now? Have they made the girl the lead yet?
I think they do. So this is probably where it happened. So pause the movie again real quick.
What's wrong?
Where are you now?
107.20.
All right, let me just catch up here. YouTube fucked up for a second.
Oh, okay. Alright, hopefully we don't fuck up again, because this will still be relatively easy to edit. I'd like to not make it more complicated.
Yeah, okay, so 107.20, I'm looking at, fuck, I looked up the name of this character last night, and now I've forgotten it again. Fucking...
Mustache dude! And
no, not Raoul.
wig girl.
I know Raoul. Christine and Raoul. He looks like he's going in, and she does not look happy about it.
No. Alright, let's press play in 3, 2, 1, play. Holy shit, that's a bad wig.
Pretty bad, yeah.
If you met a girl with that wig, you'd be like, that's a bad wig. You would say exactly the same thing that you'd think in your head. And you'd be okay with that, because it'd be what you thought. What were their plans again? They had plans against the Phantom. What were they?
I don't think it was plans against the Phantom. I think it was just plans to run off together or something. I mean, what the fuck are they going to do against the Phantom?
I mean, they could, again, as I keep saying, they could theoretically just get out of the opera. Like, she could just stop showing up, and I guess they would probably be fine. But no, they all just keep coming back to this place.
Yeah, it's usually a struggle on her part because of her, dedication to her career.
Right.
And her
Well,
desire.
I get that element of it. It's like if she wasn't in a relationship, I might even understand it more. But he's got all this money. He should just be like, realistically, listen, come run off with me for a while. Let them deal with him, and then when you come back, everything will be fine. It might be more interesting if they pushed it more on her, like more directly, like, oh no, you have to stay and be the lead, so that way he doesn't kill anybody else. Like, that would probably be better, but we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, they play it up a little bit more in the Claude Rains version, in that in one of the dudes that is interested in her tries to get her to leave the opera and just like run off with him, and she's like, nah, like this is my life.
Right. And she doesn't look happy about that right now, like the idea of running off. Because I imagine she thinks that the Phantom is going to try and murder him if they try to do that. Which is probably what's going to happen, right?
She is, of course, terrified of the Phantom, as you would be.
I mean, that's the thing that I think works, is that we got that really good scene, perhaps a little too long, but it was long for a good reason, of him taking her into his chambers and pretty much threatening her that you are mine now. And If you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill everybody you care about, and some people you even don't.
Yeah. Have you noticed in silent films that every scene feels like it might be a tad long? It's just because I feel like they weren't sure when to cut yet. Like they were never sure. Like, is this enough? Have we showed you enough yet?
Well, that's part of it, but I also feel like part of it is just the intertitles stretch it out so much longer than it needs to be.
That's probably a factor too. I love that scene there where he raises the gate and we just see the hanging corpse in shadow.
That's a really good shot. Again, like I said, the cinematography in these movies is better than perhaps anything for 20 years after this in the sound era. By and large, there are exceptions, of course, but there's exceptions in every era of all art. I'm talking about the general stock.
I mean, when did cinematography really start to get good again? Fucking Kubrick? Like,
I'm not saying, I don't know about that. I think there's a couple guys in, maybe his era. Yeah, maybe. Late 60s, I would say.
Yeah, your Kubricks and your Hitchcocks, and
because in the 50s and early 60s, Hollywood is just still this devout manufacturing machine that it became at the beginning of the sound era, and they produced a lot of things that I love. But even still, it's all part of that totally dated machine now. And it's only the stuff that you get in the late 60s that's inspired by that more kind of auteur vision that, stands up the test of time, like a lot of the cinematography of these silent movies does. This movie, a testament to that, better than many others I've seen even. I would definitely have to say, somewhat surprisingly, this is probably one of my favorite silent films I've seen. Again, maybe that's just because I'm able to get more into the story because I'm familiar with it, but I'm definitely more involved than I have been in a lot of silent movies I've seen where it's like I don't even know what's going on half the time. I'm just kind of staring at people looking at each other dramatically.
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to a couple factors. One, the performance and makeup of Lon Chaney. Two, as I mentioned before, the establishment of this sort of this atmosphere and look that would carry on into later Universal movies. And then also just what we were talking about before, this movie is really well-paced, especially for something from 1925.
By and large. I mean, it definitely, again, by modern standards, it's definitely very slow. But for the time, yeah, it definitely moves at a natural pace that a lot of stuff at this time doesn't. Because it's not lingering too long on the bullshit of the characters. That's good. Clearly, we're dealing with a director who gets what we're here for, and that's important. Like this doesn't feel like a lot of the early sound horror movies, like a Dracula 31 or an Island of Lost Souls, where it feels a little distracted by the conventions of, early Hollywood, like, the romance and the main characters and everything, developing them. Like, we're not focusing too much on that to a distracting degree like we do in Island of Lost Souls and in Dracula 31 and in a bunch of other movies from that era that we're going to talk about. So I think that's certainly something to be said for the pacing. Not to say that those movies are bad. They just have different problems than this does. This scene is a little slow. I don't know if I need to see her pulling the string back and forth for such a long period of time. I'm sure the Phantom is sitting up in the fucking balcony just, like, loving this. He's going, oh my god, this is the greatest fucking thing I've ever fucking seen. Me, though? I'm not really turned on by this.
She appears to be performing a scene from Disney's Sleeping Beauty. I know the timeline doesn't match up there, but, all the elements are there.
So he murdered the pit conductor. Why? Isn't she... No, did he not? Yeah, he did.
At this point, he's just pissed and going to kidnap her because he knows she's planning to run off with Raoul.
So even though because she's the lead at this point, right?
Yeah.
So even though that's a thing and she's performing, he's still
See what he did there? He turned out the light. He turned out the lights and grabbed her while they were off. Classic move.
Is this like the first instance of that Batman-esque move there? Like cinematically, like I'm surely literary and you know, in like a fucking radio play or something like that idea is sort of described, but
that I know, yeah, I think so.
That's cool.
I've never seen an earlier instance of it, so
He does that. You know what else about this movie that I like? Some American... because this is obviously an American-produced film. Some horror movies from this period and after, maybe they feel a little overwrought in what they borrow from German Expressionism. Like, and to the extent where it almost feels out of place. Like, I love The Wolfman, but some of the German Expressionism that almost feels like, why is this a thing in this context? Like, how does this make sense? Like, why are there all these gothic shadows in this living room? You know, like, it's a little overwrought. But in this, it's very subtle, and if you were going to say this was inspired by German Expressionism, you would have to point to very specific shots, as opposed to some movies where it's like every shot has that. Whereas this, it's pretty much just like there's that one shot where they pulled up the curtain and you saw the hanging body. That was very German Expressionist.
There's the scene where the Phantom was talking to Christine and we saw his shadow on the wall, very reminiscent of Nosferatu.
Right. And there was also that earlier shot where we saw a shadow. I'm pretty sure that it was a shot. No, I don't think. I think I'm actually thinking of a different shot from another movie where we saw like a shadow increasing and decreasing in size to show that it was getting closer. But I don't think that happened earlier. I think I was thinking of a different black and white movie. But that would also be German Expressionism if that did happen.
It borrows very specifically from German Expressionism, but one thing it doesn't borrow is like the ridiculous architecture.
No, yeah, this is very realistic setting-wise, and that's very Hollywood.
It's also meant because this is an actual real location that they're meant to be portraying. You know, I wonder if
I mean, that wouldn't stop a proper German Expressionist filmmaker.
No, it wouldn't. But I think under Hollywood sensibilities, that is a thing that matters.
Exactly. Yeah, that is an absolute necessity. Even in like a fantastic context. Like I remember I was listening to like an interview with like the people who made Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Like the costume designer was talking about making the SHIELD version of the Captain America suit, like the Black Ops one, and she was talking about how realistic she had to make the gear on the combat on the combat side of it, and I just thought that was very interesting, like how like that attention to detail that Hollywood still puts into things that doesn't exist in other countries. You know, like that's very American, that kind of sensibility. And it makes more sense in a Captain America context, especially for like the Winter Soldier, where that movie is trying to be more grounded than some of your other Marvel movies. Like Guardians of the Galaxy obviously doesn't do that. But even still,
I guess the closest thing to that in another country that I can think of is how obviously under the old method of making the Japanese kaiju film, a lot of attention had to be paid to the models. But
that's
other than
true. But like the sci-fi stuff though, and all the like that's all like there is no attention to detail in terms of like, well, what if the military really built a maser cannon? Like, no, it's like we're just gonna build a maser cannon. Like, what would look cool, you know? Like maybe there's a little more realism there than I give them credit for, but even still, like there isn't that obsession with it that the people who made Cap's costume at the beginning of Winter Soldier had, that they didn't have when they made Avengers, certainly. Yeah,
well, it's like you watch kung fu movies from China, and there are two very specific types of them. There are the more realistic kung fu movies, you know, the sort of thing that Bruce Lee started off with. So it's all, you know, feasible martial arts. And then there's the flying around on the wires and the crazy shit like you get in the Five Deadly Venoms, which is one of my favorite kung fu films. I like both of those styles, but they're very different. And one of them is just a little bit more focused on real martial arts, and the other is focused on, wouldn't that be neat?
Right. And both are good. It's just, you know, there's different good examples of each of each genre, subgenre is perhaps the better way to put it. Just as there are different subgenres in horror, as we'll discuss when we go through these different Universal monster movies that sort of reflect those different subgenres.
Now, Raoul and Other Man are descending into the catacombs to
Try to smoke out the Phantom.
try to find Christine.
This is very Relic. It's like D'Agusta down in the fucking basement. Is that the Phantom right there? Is that him speaking, or is that somebody who he's just sent off to be like, hey, tell them not to come through, otherwise I'll kill them? Because, yeah, that's just some dude, yeah.
Yeah, I've never been clear about that, whether that was some trick that the Phantom pulled to try and get them to turn around, or if there was a literal ghost down in the catacombs. It could be that it was a literal ghost.
It could just be a bum that who knows about the Phantom, who doesn't fuck around with him, and is just like, hey, listen, I live down here. I'm kind of a metaphorical ghost. Don't fuck with him. You will die.
I'd like to point out, though, how his face just sort of faded out of the shadows.
He looked very spectral, but I think it's supposed to be more metaphorical.
That's a trick that was also later on used in John Carpenter's Halloween, of course. There's that great shot where Jamie Lee Curtis is standing in front of the doorway and it's pitch black, and then you just slowly see Michael Myers' mask like fade in from the darkness.
That's really cool that he's sort of berating her for being ungrateful, since he basically got her the lead role in the opera, and she's obviously, not grateful for it because he's threatening to murder a bunch of people that she likes, obviously. So that's all good stuff. I really like the mask because it looks very skeletal, like his face does, and you can't tell where it begins and ends because of the cloth. Maybe that's more evident because of the quality. But it definitely evokes the proper effect.
Yeah, I know I've already said this a few times in this commentary, but I would definitely recommend people to go watch a better quality version of this film. And if you wind up liking it as much as I did, go get the Blu-ray, which looks wonderful and features both the 1925 original cut as well as the 1929 reissue, as well as several different scores, because of course silent films didn't have scores of their own. It was just sort of up to whoever to play something live along with it. So there are several different musical tracks that you can watch the movie with as well.
This is also very Creature from the Black Lagoon, now that I'm thinking about it, when they go to get the girl at the end of that.
True.
I mean, overall, the story of Phantom of the Opera is not dissimilar to King Kong, the common inspiration for Creature from the Black Lagoon and all of our monstrous interpretations of a monster walking off with a girl. But Phantom is maybe sort of another, and Beauty and the Beast is obviously the common inspiration for King Kong as well. But
yeah.
But Phantom is not dissimilar to that story.
Phantom feels to me like a dark twist on the Beauty and the Beast narrative.
Right. It's like, what if the Beast was a beast on the inside as well as the outside? But forced into that by the people around him and by his surroundings.
Yeah, well, it's kind of unrealistic about I'm talking about a fucking fairy tale, obviously, but the thing that's really unrealistic about Beauty and the Beast is that
she falls for him.
Well, not that she... Well, yeah, that is kind of unrealistic.
I mean, but also they glorify, like, the Stockholm Syndrome element of it.
But you would expect him to be even more of a dick, like the Phantom is, because he's been treated so poorly throughout his entire life.
Well, but I mean, he's royalty, and he was only a monster for so long.
It's true. It's true.
I also don't know how long he was supposed to be a monster in the original story. Like in this Disney movie, it's a little more understandable because he'd been that way since he was a kid.
Yeah, and I understand that in the book, the Phantom has a redemption at the end, but honestly, I like that Lon Chaney's Phantom goes out a villain.
In this context, that would make zero sense and would be totally unrealistic. This is a guy who has made his decision.
Oh, has he taken off the mask now? I think he has.
Yes, he has. I noticed that as well. This is this is more of a character study than it is like an arc for a character, I would say. Like, we're more taking a look at this madman than we are seeing him go through any kind of grand change. It's like Kong. I brought up that comparison earlier in the sense that his feelings for the girl are ultimately his demise.
I like a villain who goes the extra mile and dresses well, even though he lives in a sewer and has the face of a skull.
He reminds me of Diogenes Pendergast from the Pendergast novels. He's got all kinds of fucked up problems, but he still dresses sharply, and he's got like this classy demeanor.
Ah, the old using a reed to breathe underwater trick. A classic.
Yeah, does that work? I'm sure it does if you have the right reed, but where did he get the reed? I guess he has one that he's like, oh, this is my breathing reed.
Yeah,
why not just buy... Do you think did they not have proper scuba gear at this point? Maybe that's too cumbersome for him in his disfigurements. And also, if you're Lon Chaney...
I don't know if snorkels are a thing. For sure, plastic's not a thing yet.
That's true. That's true. So maybe if you're Lon Chaney, and you're also like, I also have to have this fucking makeup on, and I'm going to have to mime doing this, even if... And I guess he actually had to go underwater doing this. I don't know if he had the makeup on when he was under the water, though. I guess he would have to use some kind of non-intrusive to the face method, like a reed in the mouth.
I'm not even entirely sure if it is a reed. I mean, it might just be a wood pipe.
That's true, which would make more sense. This is a good climax, though. Does she actually have black hair? I thought she had blonde hair.
No, yeah, Mary Filden in this movie does not. She has darker hair.
She had a blonde wig on at one point, though. Didn't like the non-lead character she played earlier on had blonde hair, though, right? Like a blonde wig.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay, that's what got me confused then.
I'm not sure what color her hair was supposed to be in the book, but I know that other versions of it, such as the Claude Rains version, have had a blonde Christine. So
that's the iconography I'm familiar with. I'm sure that's another thing from the Lloyd Webber version that I'm just sort of more used to.
Well, I think it's more so just a horror cliche at this point.
That comes from Kong, right? Yeah. Wow, he had the makeup on underwater. That's wild. That's insane.
For whatever reason. A lot of the time, like at least 80% of the time, when there's a monster movie, the female in distress tends to be blonde. It's fascinating.
That's another trope that has been twisted on its head in all these decades since. In Buffy, that was the whole idea of her, was, to twist the whole horror cliche of like, oh, a girl walks into an alley, a monster attacks her. Like, oh, what if the blonde girl just suddenly started kicking the monster's ass because she turned out to be, like walking into it on purpose.
That's one good thing about this type of movie makeup. I mean, there's no latex at this point. It's all really hardy materials. So
it's not going to come off in water, obviously, because it didn't.
I mean, he's got like fucking hooks in his mouth to give him that ghastly grin, and I don't remember the detail of how he gets his nose to stay up like that, but it's all like fucking spirit gum and shit. Like it's tough shit.
Fixed in. Now, that's the thing about this as well. That's the appeal of going back to these old movies, is seeing the tactile, brutal, physical way they go about doing this stuff. Like, they are not really necessarily having fun sitting underwater in this painful makeup with a fucking wooden pole in his mouth, knocking over dudes in boats, actually going and doing that, because how else is he gonna evoke doing that in 1925? There's no CGI or camera trickery to do that. You've got to do it for the camera.
There was a wonderful book that I read years ago that was about the history of the American horror film, and it, of course, very early on was talking all about Lon Chaney and his career, and I wish I could remember the title of the book so that I could recommend it to people, but I don't remember the title of the book. But it went into great detail about how he pulled off all of these makeups and some of the shit that he had to endure. He had a level of dedication that I don't think you'd get out of many actors today. I'll put it that way.
Oh, it depends on the actor and what they're acting in. It's just that too often these days, comfort is put above quality.
He reminds me a lot of Haru Nakajima in that way.
Yeah, Haru Nakajima is another example of somebody who it's the appeal of watching them in action is that they're like actually physically exerting themselves and doing stuff.
Yeah, Haru Nakajima, who could get his fucking balls on fire and then just go to the hospital afterwards and show up to work the next day like nothing ever happened.
That's why we like a John McClane and a Die Hard, because we see them bleed and get hurt while they're doing stuff, even if the actor isn't going through that necessarily, but it looks like they are, and it's very convincing. That's what we miss in a lot of movies these days, is convincing consequences and physical injury to our protagonists.
The reason he took the mask off before was that he needed to, so that he could do the whole
breathe.
Yeah.
Presumably he could have just lifted the cloth up, though. Although I guess it would have been harder, and the mask wouldn't have stayed on.
She's like, no, there's totally not two people in that other room over there.
She's also a way better female protagonist than maybe we might have hoped for in a movie from this time period, because she's not an idiot, and I like that.
Yeah,
she's in a ship situation trying to make the best of it,
and there's not a whole lot she can do.
That's another thing, and also every chance she gets to do something to him, she takes it. And I also like how she gives him no quarter. She at no point attempts to be like, oh, well, maybe he's not so bad. No, he's a psychotic killer. Any chance she's gonna get to get away from him or get a leg up over him, she tries to take it. The only example of she's trying to dig a little deeper into him is when she pulls the mask off. But that's an example of sick curiosity more than anything else. Although maybe when she hears him play the piano, she feels a little bit of empathy for him as well.
Yeah, I loved how mischievous she was in that scene where she goes to take the mask off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Christine in the Rains movie is far more sympathetic to him, partially because she knew him before he was disfigured.
Right, well, that makes a lot more sense. I'm not saying it can't work either way. In the context of this situation, this works a lot better than I may have imagined it.
Boy, she's acting.
They're all acting their asses off. What's going on?
Oh, so that room that they stepped into was booby-trapped, and they didn't know it. And basically, he flipped a switch or something, and now it's heating up in there.
Oh my god, this is like the opposite of King Kong Escapes.
Essentially, he's like, "You're gonna stay down here with me forever, bitch, or they're just gonna roast alive." That's gonna be how it is.
Yeah, man, he is a great, great villain, and there we go, seeing that awesome face again. He's certainly the best actor in this by far, because none of his movements feel like none of his actions feel like overacting, and that's really important in the timeless quality of some of these performances. You totally buy that his character would act like this, and he should be overacting a little bit in comparison to everybody else. But the problem is that everybody else is overacting because they're silent film actors, and that's what they were told to do.
Yeah, and if anybody listening to this doesn't know what Lon Chaney looked like just as a normal man, go look at it, and then Google him real quick, and then be amazed, because this is such a radical transformation.
Yeah, I know anything like this.
I know the man was called the Man of a Thousand Faces for a good reason. He completely disappeared into all of his roles. But this is perhaps his most dramatic transformation. And that's even compared to something like Hunchback of Notre Dame, where he's covered in tumors and shit. He doesn't look himself at all. You look at that face and you don't see Lon Chaney, you see a monster. And that's wonderful. That's something
is there ice in there that's melting? Or something? What are we seeing?
It's supposed to be ice.
Well, that maybe it's their sweat, but there's something in there, like dirt, maybe. I don't know.
There's sand on. It's probably dust. I mean, they're down in these catacombs under the Paris Opera House, just hundreds of years of dust and shit.
How is he roasting them alive?
That's a good question. I wonder if the book explains the mechanics of it. I don't understand how the
This
movie
is
traffics.
1920 something, 25. How is he?
Well, the book was written in the late 1800s, so
How is he? I mean, like, there are certain. I mean, listen, this is not like the caveman times. There are certainly ways he could have done this. Like, there are certain technologies that an eccentric motherfucker like this would have had access to. And again, I wish this. The only criticism I had of this version is that I just wish we like got more of a better sense of his intelligence. I get that he's got skills, like he can play the piano and he can go underwater with a wooden pole, but he can murder people without being discovered by and large. But even still, he seems very impulsive to me, and he doesn't have that forward-thinking intelligence that I wish he had.
well, a couple of those shots in there, it appeared like, or at least they were trying to give the illusion of that there were actual flames in the room with them, so it could be a gas thing.
Yeah, that's possible. I just wish we understood how it worked. Again, and this might be more of a problem because we're not living in that era and we don't know what he could be using. Like, if you lived in this era watching this movie, you could be like, oh, well, this is the technology that we have. I, in my head, can try and put it together.
Well, it's also a limitation of the silent film. They can't really explain all that because if they were going to, then that would be just more title cards, and you want to try to keep those at a minimum and only use them when you need to advance the story. And so the audience just has to sort of be like, well, that's what's happening in order for it to work. Again, I wonder if the book explains it.
I don't really think it's a huge deal. I just wish, again, my biggest criticism is just that I wish he was a little more reserved and a little more intelligent, just not so impulsive. But again, I get why they did that for this era, because it's works better for the performance. Oh my god, why does this have to be so drawn out? Just say yes or no. She should have screamed it in the fucking main room. Like, if that was my girlfriend, or if I was a girl and that was my husband, or whatever version of the scenario I'm in, I would have been like, yeah, of course, like, I'll stay down here with you, no matter what you fucking look like, just don't kill them. Like, why does it have to be so drawn out? And so why does she have to pick a fucking bug to decide her answer? This is insane.
Why are his dials shaped like arthropods?
They're not even actual bugs. Like, this is madness.
This man is a crazy person.
Not only is he crazy, she's crazy for going along with it. Just be like, yes, you dumb fuck, I will do this. I get it's a silent movie, and again, they're trying to hold down on the intertitles, but even still, explaining that was so complicated.
Oh shit, she ain't turned into a scorpion. She's like, fuck that guy, I ain't staying down here.
Wow, that makeup is so amazing. The way he's able to emote in it. Like, again, you don't get a lot of that in, like, the 40s and 50s with all the rubber they started plastering over everybody's faces. Again, comfort over performance.
I don't think you got to have that kind of expression through heavy makeup again until you get to, like, Planet of the Apes.
Planet of the Apes, yeah. Again, late 60s. That's when Hollywood was like, oh, let's get our shit together, guys. Not that I'm saying there's nothing in those ensuing 30 years that I don't like. There's lots of things, but they're missing some things.
It usually tends to be on the strength of the storytelling, not so much the effects.
Right, it's more the script than it is like, oh, the cinematography really stands out, or oh, the
we're draining the swamp. Oh shit, he tricked her. She's just flooding the room that they're in.
Well, she's killing them in a different way, so. They're not dying of heat. They're dying of lots of water.
I think they would have blown up if she had turned the other bug, because the room that they wandered into was full of gunpowder.
Mm. Well, I guess if the heat would have just kept going up, theoretically it could have just. And if there's gas in the room and flames, then theoretically it could have just.
Oh, they weren't, but they weren't in the gas room anymore, though. They got out of that room and then they tumbled into this other room where there was all this gunpowder.
Is he going to die trying to save them?
No.
I was going to say, that would be weak.
I think he lets them live just because, obviously.
I'm
he's
not
still-
against him letting them live. If he has this, I prefer him having this like sick, twisted code of honor. I think that makes more sense for his character.
No, but what's about to happen though is that the angry mob of peasants will burst in and chase him out of the opera house. And then they chase him down to the canal, and then there's a last wonderful bit of acting from Lon Chaney that we'll see here in a minute.
Do you like that this all goes the way of Frankenstein? More so the movie Frankenstein, I mean.
Yeah, this is really Frankenstein went the way of Phantom of the Opera.
That's true. Does the book end like that?
No, again, in the book he has a redemption at the end, and then I think he gets to live. He's just not evil anymore.
So this movie is the progenitor of that Frankenstein cliche, as far as we know.
As far as I can tell, yeah. I mean, I don't know.
We have also watched the 1910 Thomas Edison Frankenstein, and I'm pretty sure it also does not end with a crowd marching down on him. I'm pretty sure it ends with vague, esoteric nonsense.
Did that version ever even leave his lap? I don't
That's
remember.
what I'm thinking. I'm pretty sure it all takes place in that one set, and at the end, like he and the monster like end up in a mirror and both disappear. I'm pretty sure that's how that movie ends. There is another lost Frankenstein silent film though that I've never seen. None of us have seen. That may or may not have a mob in it. I doubt it though. It probably also just takes place in the lab. That's all those old Frankenstein movies ever had the money for, except the Universal one. Did anybody else make a Frankenstein movie in the 30s that wasn't Universal?
I'm not sure.
I don't think it's until we get to the late 40s and then into the 50s with Hammer and everybody else who then started doing their own stuff with the character.
Was the book already public domain at that point?
That's another good question. I'm pretty sure it was. I'm pretty sure by the time Universal did it, it was public. I'm pretty sure by the time Thomas Edison did it, it was public domain.
When was that book written?
That book is considerably older than Dracula. Remember, Dracula was like 1880s or something, and then Frankenstein's like 1830s, I think.
Right, yeah. Because the whole way that the Dracula novel is told, it's all through like diary entries and newspaper clippings and things like that. I don't even know if that style of novel writing was a thing yet when Frankenstein.
No, Frankenstein is also written in that style, though. It's kind of the exact same thing.
That's right. You're right. God, I haven't read Frankenstein in a long time.
I've read Frankenstein more recently than I've read Dracula, and like Frankenstein more than Dracula. I am planning on rereading Dracula though very soon, and if that's the case, I might like it better because it's newer, maybe. But I don't know. I like the story of Frankenstein better than the story of Dracula. I've always been more interested by like the character of Dracula than I've been like a fan of that original Bram Stoker story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, but this movie's almost over. We should continue to talk about that. He stole a carriage. That was cool. Again, the acting in this is off the wall in a good way. And this has a much better sense of scope than the movie did earlier when we were trapped inside the opera house.
Yes, it's very similar to like Rear Window in that way. The majority of the movie's in that one room, and very rarely do you venture out of it.
Does it get like a crazy sense of scope at the end? Like, do they start running around like the city or whatever? I've never seen Rear Window.
You've never? Oh God, no. You know what's probably a better example is Dial M for Murder. The majority of that movie takes place just in this one apartment because
did he
Hitchcock
toss her
decided-
off because he knew they were gonna go down, or?
I think she might have jumped out or something.
Oh.
Because he runs back to try and grab her.
Did she die? Oh God, that's if so, that's a great ending.
I don't think she's dead.
She would be. I mean, she should be, but if not, I'm not going to discount it. I mean, this is a Universal classic monster movie.
Yeah, it didn't look like she was dead. It looked like she was hugging Raoul back there.
She should definitely be injured. A few cracked ribs for good measure.
Yeah, she's jumping out of a carriage, not an automobile. So there's a little bit of a better chance of survival than.
I guess it's a little bit more like a traditional tuck and roll than like being thrown out of a moving vehicle, like
Yeah,
a
I mean,
30-mile-per-hour car or whatever.
I mean, a high-speed carriage to be sure, but still a carriage.
Right.
Look, reaches into his jacket and he pulls out his hand like, ah, and then they all jump like, oh shit, what's he got?
He's got a grenade in 1925. Although grenades were a thing, they didn't look like that though.
He could have had some sort of rudimentary explosive anyway.
It wouldn't have looked like that, and it would have been way more conspicuous. Like grenades at this time were like big, like sticks of dynamite.
The great part is right here. Did you see that? There was nothing in his hand. He tricked him. He was going to die anyway, so he went out doing one last dick move. I love it.
And it's a bit of theatricality, which befits the fact that he's the Phantom of the Opera. I like how so many of them rushed him at once that they got thrown off the dock. That is a great, great ending. Yeah.
Yeah, and you get the feeling that he's just being torn to shreds.
Oh, yeah, I mean, he would just be trampled on. If anything, more of them would be hurt than he would. If anything, he might even be able to escape from that.
They just threw his corpse in the river.
Yeah. And that's awesome. That's also what I like about all these old Universal monster movies is they just stop, and it's fine because the stories wrap themselves up in such natural ways that you don't need anything else. And this is a prime example of that. The proper lovers were reunited, and because the Phantom stepped out of his comfort zone, because Eric left the opera, he met his end. He got too big for his britches.
Indeed. So, Bill, that was your first time watching Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera. All of it.
Yeah, all together.
What'd you think?
I kind of loved it. Because a lot of the bits that in a traditional silent movie like this would stretch out to be too long. They all felt that way. Like all the bits where Raoul and Christine were chit-chatting with each other. I was like, okay, can you guys either go off and fuck or just leave this goddamn opera house, please, because you're just gonna die here anyway. But despite that, all of the stuff that probably stood out to people in 1925 still stands out in 2017, and I think that says a lot about the quality of this film and about the quality of how, again, as we've been talking about, some silent movies hold up better than movies from 30 years after this because of the way in which the limitations put upon the filmmakers when they were made. And I think that that's really great. But Lon Chaney as a performer really stands out, and the makeup and the physical endurance that he had to go through to get said performance is again another of the things that really stands out. So I think there's a mix of things here that makes this a successful film above just being a good solid horror movie, which I also think this functions better at than a lot of other silent movies that I've seen, like Nosferatu. This is leaps and bounds better than that in any respectable sense. Although maybe that, because of the German expressionism, stands out maybe a little better cinematography-wise than this does. But
the problem with Nosferatu is in the pacing. Again, this movie is
the story. It's just a bad version of Dracula.
This movie is very well paced for something of the period.
Yeah, well, it's also a good adaptation as well, which Nosferatu isn't really.
Nosferatu drags, and whenever the vampire is on screen, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
but
this doesn't have the issue though of like the only good parts are Lon Chaney, not at all, and also he's in a lot of it, whereas the vampire is, very, very hidden. Although it took us a while to get to the Phantom, but once we were there, he was in quite a bit of it, and his presence is felt a lot more than the vampire in Nosferatu.
Yeah. Lon Chaney is certainly the best part of the film, but I think everybody does a good job.
Totally. Yeah, no, I really like it, man. I think it totally stood out. I will probably sit through it at some point without talking over it, but despite that, I mean, I enjoyed sitting through it. I think as a Universal monster movie, it's even proved itself more on that front because of the atmosphere and because of the story. There's a lot more similarities to other monster movies that I didn't think of, and it also stands out more as a traditional horror monster story because of the character and his motives and his character and his personality, and just the fact that he's more of a straight up villain. So, yeah, all those things and many more stood out to me. I would have to say, is it better than Ghostbusters 2? I don't know. It doesn't even really work on that scale, but it's...
That's definitely an apples to oranges situation.
I'm trying to think of like an older movie that I can compare it to. I guess Nosferatu is a good mark. It's definitely better than Nosferatu. I don't know.
I'd say it's probably closer to the level of, and I'd say it's closer to the level of a Caligari even.
Yeah, I might even like it better than that.
I definitely liked it better than Caligari simply because I have more nostalgia for it.
I think I like it better than Metropolis, which prior to this was like my go-to favorite silent film.
Interesting. Yeah, because Metropolis, while excellent, has a lot of those issues.
The pacing problems.
Yeah,
it's also way longer than this is, to be fair.
Whereas this, a movie that is nearly 2 hours long, I mean, it doesn't feel that long.
I mean, it definitely has those stretches where it feels a little long, but overall, the pace of the story feels very natural, and that's rare given this time period where everything feels so unnaturally stretched out for time to the point where we feel like we don't even know how real people feel. But then you just have to remind yourself that this is like 100 years, almost 100 years in the past, so, that's what's going on. Also, that color bit, amazing.
Yes. That was the saddest part about watching this version of the film, which again was not in great quality, is that I don't feel like you got to experience the color portion to its fullest extent. But again, it was the most complete version that was on YouTube, and I wanted you to get the full breadth of the story, this being your first full sit-through of it.
Right, and I definitely got that above all else, and that's really the crucial thing in talking about it for this series. So yeah. That's Phantom of the Opera. The last thing I want to say, though, since we are talking about this as like a retrospective on the whole Universal Classic Monsters franchise and, how it stood up at the time, how it evolved over time. Nowadays, we have the Dark Universe, the attempt to bring that into the modern age, and the Phantom of the Opera will be included in that. Having seen this, I was like, oh, well, if any version of that is going to be like a good inspiration, like this it'll have to be this. It still doesn't make any sense to put this character in that cast of characters in like the same mold. I understand packaging this movie in that franchise if you're going to talk about those films like we are. But to include this character in that kind of expanded mythology is a little ridiculous, don't you think?
Yeah, I think the reason that I and many film historians consider this the true start to the Universal horror oeuvre is that I think it informs so much of what those films wound up becoming. Again, just the atmosphere, the look of it, even those films that were talkies and require less over-the-top dramatic acting to sell what they're selling, they still ham it up a bit in those from time to time, and I don't know. I feel like this is so the prototype for what they wound up doing later on.
Right. Absolutely. Without question. Like I said, it absolutely proved its familial connections to that in the aesthetic sense and in the sense of like the story and the themes. But again, on a character level, the Phantom himself is just a guy. He's a murderer, and in that sense,
especially when you consider the fact that despite being 6 years prior to the proper Universal Monster cycle, the reissue version came out in 1929, which is only 2 years previous to Dracula.
Right.
And if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure that it performed very well then as well. So
as many movies did when they were re-released, because this is obviously home video or any kind of accessibility to films regularly.
Exactly.
But
so this is not as far removed from those as even like a Wolfman is,
And even still, Lon Chaney being in it, that obviously also has bearings on the franchise, because he was considered for Dracula himself, and then his son went on to become such a huge staple in that cycle. So all of that and many more things make it worth talking about and being the first entry on our list. And I think it was just cool to start off with one that I didn't know, and I'm glad that I liked it as much as I did, because there was every chance that I could have walked away from this totally cold too and just been like, yeah, that was a thing, like I did Nosferatu. But no, absolutely not. This absolutely struck a chord with me, as it seems to have you as well, and I think that speaks to it. So yeah, Dylan, what is next on the agenda?
Well, as I alluded to previously, 6 years later, we would see the true start to the Universal horror cycle with Dracula. This is the very beginning of the talkie era in Hollywood, and there are some growing pains that go along with that. But we'll talk about that next time.
Indeed we shall. So, until then... Ooh, I also didn't come up with an outro for this series yet. Alright, I think I got it. Until then, we recorded this commentary at night because what music they make. That doesn't really make sense, but whatever, it sounds fine. It's a good edit point. I can work with that.